shared with me in 2008. They had an X-ray picture taken when the guy had crossed immigration. On a business visa, this associate had in his bag his testimonials, his university certificates. They asked a question, why is it that this guy was carrying his mark sheets in his package? We were surprised. I mean, we never told him to carry his baggage. I mean, we as owners of immigration need to, advise guys, but we would have never told him or her to carry testimonials in the luggage. But they are identified. They said, your audit is fine, but why was this person carrying the testimonials? That became a huge issue. Does it mean to say you're trying to convert, or what was the intent? What was the motive? So the kind of do's and don'ts that we're going to get into EMEA, the Middle East and Africa would be huge. Countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana are on the wire. I have been asked to do something in my present for Angola. We have already started working on that. So the do's and don'ts that we have to get into would be huge, and we need to share those experiences. Thank you.
Thank you for your experience you shared, Sharik. Brendan, you could talk about the gap between the law and the practice on the ground in the markets.
Sure. The first thing that in actual fact, it's interesting because I'm actually in South Africa for 5 months building out our Africa practice because of the level of interest. So a couple of things. In relation to this enormous gap in some of the emerging markets between what is the stated law and the actual practice is very significant because in many of the emerging markets, particularly in Africa, there is very little legislation, or the legislation itself is still based on quite antiquated French law in Sub-Saharan Africa, or whatever the colonial power law was. And because of it, they're actually based on the world as it was 40, 50 years ago. And so the legislation does not keep up with the practice. What that means is because there's no effective legislative guideline for immigration officers, they have enormous subjective opportunity to make subjective assessments. That's very dangerous in many of the environments because they can just arbitrarily refuse applications because they didn't feel like processing it, or because they don't believe that someone has the requisite skills that matches the position. But there's no legal legislation that actually allows for that sort of an assessment to take place. But it doesn't matter. Or, of course, the other area of great risk with that is the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So you need to be extremely careful in many of these emerging markets. One other quick comment on the Middle East about the sharing of information. The GCC countries are building a program to share information about where people are actually holding their residence permit and where they're actually holding their work authorization. So people that are, for instance, living in Dubai but working in Saudi Arabia, those two governments are now sharing information on exactly that and will be following up.
Thanks, Brendan. I know we're running very short, but one quick question. As you see in the UK and as Brendan mentioned in the Netherlands, they're moving more towards an attestation-based approval system and with the government coming in largely for audits. Do you see this happening in more parts of Europe?
For France, definitely. Most definitely. There's a huge increase, and there is an increase on any company that is receiving employees coming from India. And we have a dual control system. You have a labour office who comes in, but you can also have a social security officer. So you have double penalties, financial, and the misuse of a business visa is very important.
Any quick questions from the audience? I realize time's up. So, any closure comments, Brendan? Sharik?
No, I'm fine.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
It's a great panel.